Well, good afternoon, everyone. I've got 1:30 on my clock here. We have about 14 participants on the line. We've got participants via computer and via telephone. We'll get started in a minute or so. I'll just start by saying thank you to all who are participating in our first ever Grain Farmers of Ontario information session. This is the first time that we're putting on one of these info sessions. In the past, we've launched our call for proposals and left it out there and waited for the proposals to come filtering in. This is the first time that we're trying to provide a little bit more guidance to help improve the quality of the proposals that are being received by Grain Farmers of Ontario. My name is Matthew Cherwinski. I'm the research lead with Grain Farmers of Ontario, and I'll be co-leading this information session along with my colleague Natalie DeMeo, who's the research coordinator here at GFO. Can everybody hear me okay? Yep. Great. For those who are participating via computer and not via telephone, we do have a share screen option set up. So at this point in time, you should be seeing a Grain Farmers of Ontario info session cover page, which has myself and Natalie listed there along with our contact information, telephones, emails, as well as our roles at GFO. As we're getting started here, I do want to give a couple quick disclaimers here. First and foremost, I do want to mention that we are recording this session. The purpose of recording the session is so that those researchers or scientists who could not make it at this time can have this information session shared with them via email if they so choose. It'll be circulated upon request. And so if there are any objections to having yourselves recorded, please let us know. There is a chat option in this Zoom video conference system that we're using here. So if you do not wish to have yourself recorded, but still wish to participate by asking a question, you can type it out and we would present that anonymously, no problem at all. For the actual presentation itself, we'll be asking everyone to please mute your microphones so that there's no background feedback noise or any disruptive interference that might be occurring. Regarding the question and answer part of this session, we'll be going through presenting a lot of information that's been made available to you. And we're going to leave some time at the end of this presentation for an open back and forth Q&A period. So we'll leave maybe 10 or 15 minutes. We'll see how many questions there are. So if there's any questions throughout the presentation, please make note of those to yourselves, write them down if you need to, and withhold those questions until we get to the Q&A session at the end. So very briefly, I'm going to give a quick high-level overview of myself. My name is Matthew. I'm the research lead. My main role is to oversee the priority setting process here at GFO. So every year, throughout the growing season, we review the current existing research priorities and identify any missing gaps that might exist. And we make sure that those priorities are up to date and revised and revamped from year to year. So that's my main role. In addition to my role at GFO, I also double as the project manager for the Canadian Field Crop Research Alliance, the CFCRA, oversee funding through the cluster program, which is federal funding. It's an industry-led initiative, and at this point in time, we're near the end of a 5-year funding cycle under the GF2 framework, and we're preparing ourselves for new funding initiatives under the newly announced Canadian Agricultural Partnership. So, in addition to my role at GFO, I oversee the cluster programs that GFO has through the CFCRA. I'll hand it over to Natalie to give an overview of herself, and then we'll get into the session itself.
Hi everyone, so I'm Natalie DeMeo. I'm the research coordinator here at GFO. So I'm involved in setting up the call for research proposals and setting up the agreements and notifying people when they've been awarded the funding. And I also work on the project database that we launched about a year ago last month. So that's a great resource for you guys if you're interested in learning what we've funded in the past and kind of make sure that you're not duplicating efforts that we've already funded before. That's part of the proposal where we ask you to make sure that like if there are any links, just to make it sure that you distinguish yourself from those previous research projects. So with that, I'm just going to go over the purpose of this info session. As Matthew mentioned, in the past, we've kind of let you guys figure out how to fill our template out. Of course, we gave you the chance to give us a call, but new this year is this info session. And so we're going to highlight all of the documents that we gave you. We realize we gave you quite a few this year, a few new ones, and we'll answer any general questions you may have when filling out the application. So please keep your questions general in nature about the templates itself that we've, and if you have any questions about your specific project, you can give us a call or email us. So please keep those specific questions to yourself. We won't be answering those during this time. So as I said, we'll be reviewing the documents we sent out. New this year is our program guide. I had several people request that, and as part of that program guide, I've split it into two. The program guide itself kind of gives you a rundown on all of the ways of answering the application questions, and then in appendices 1 and 2, those are examples themselves. I'll get into that a bit later. So as I was saying, I created this program guide for you guys to go through, and so I give an introduction to what the research call is, who's eligible to apply, some other information that you guys have asked me in the past, how to build a research work plan and transfer plan for knowledge, some additional ideas for funding, or if you had any questions about that, and then finally how to submit your proposal. And then as a part of this, we have our appendices with the sections examples, where I've asked people who submitted in 2017 if I could use theirs as an example, and then I gave some commentary, which we'll be going over some of that during this video conference. So we'll be going through the proposal template. We'll be briefly discussing the budget. If you have any questions about the template itself, please give me a call. I also have an Appendix A for knowledge transfer for your proposal. And then there's an Appendix B, which I've renamed as Research Proposal Approval by Research Institution, and I'll go over that later, and Appendix C.
So one thing that I'll mention here is that this instruction and guideline package here, this is the first time that we've ever produced a document quite like this. In the past, we've never given this level of detail and instruction and guidance. In the past, we've just presented the memo and sent out the template and asked researchers to fill them out. This year, we really wanted to give as much information and instruction as possible so that the quality of proposals coming in is as high as possible. So that's the purpose behind the guide.
Yeah, I hope you find it useful to navigate around. I've made the table of contents clickable, so you can go to whatever you want to go to. While you're looking around, you might not want to go all at once, so it's clickable, and so it should be fairly easy to navigate. If you guys have any questions or comments on it, I'll take those and maybe make a version 2 for next year.
So I'm not sure how much detail we'll go into in going through the actual guide itself, but one thing that I would want to highlight is that oftentimes when people's proposals get rejected for funding, or they don't get the support from the GFO Research Committee, a lot of researchers want to know why, and we're happy to provide that feedback. But other things that researchers ask for is perhaps some examples of proposals that did get funded in the past. So one thing that's included in this guide in one of the appendices are samples from proposals that did receive funding. And in addition to those samples, we've also presented reasons why those particular sections were filled out very well, very strongly. And so we would encourage you to look at those past successful proposals and try and mimic your proposals and include the same level of detail, or look at why they were well done and try and use that to your advantage when you submit your proposals this year and in future years.
Thanks, Matthew. So yeah, that's brand new this year, and I'll let Matthew explain the research priority setting process, and then we'll be going into the template itself and giving an overview of it.
Okay, so taking a step back, in addition to the proposal, the call for proposals, you'll notice that there was a document entitled GFO Research Priorities, and that is my responsibility here at GFO, is to update those priorities, as I said at the start of this information session. So here at GFO, we support research in 4 main priority areas, that being agronomy and production, weeds, disease, and insect pests, crop utilization and crop quality, and breeding and genetics. So every year throughout the growing season, I engage with our farmer members, with various OMAFRA field crop specialists and other provincial specialists, certified crop advisors. We also attend events where research is presented. So things like the Southwest Ag Conference, Southwest Crop Diagnostic Days, Eastern Crop Diagnostic Days. And we want to see what research is being done. And we also want to engage with various people who are in the field on the ground to ask them what their issues are. And in discussing with the issues this year, I do want to highlight a few changes that I found in this year's document that weren't present in past year's documents. So a few examples. So around nutrient use and efficiency, this year we've added sulfur as a priority area. In the past, we've only had nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium listed there. So sulfur as an example of a change. We've introduced new priorities around developing innovative new cropping systems. So looking at intercropping winter wheat and soybeans, relay cropping soybeans into a standing crop as examples there. We've also looked at the key diseases and insect pests, and in that list, we noticed that Western bean cutworm was absent and white mold was also absent. So we've added some new diseases. And in the priority updating process, we kept getting questions about why stripe rust wasn't included as a priority there. And so we teased that out a little bit, and it was in fact listed under foliar pathogens, but we've made it a little bit more clear and listed a few examples of foliar pathogens, including stripe rust. So I just wanted to highlight a few very high-level changes of what's different in this year's priority document than in last year's priority document. The other thing we do at GFO is every year we identify one or two priority areas that we want to target a particular increase in research investment. So last year, we really emphasized cover crop research. We wanted to see proposals looking at cover crop use, benefits, advantages, disadvantages to cover crop use. And I think we received 7 or 8 proposals looking at cover crops, and we funded, I think, 5 of those. I'm not sure if those numbers are totally accurate, but we did receive a good collection of proposals targeting cover crops. This year, we've targeted or put an emphasis on herbicide resistance management and coping with the breakdown of resistance, as well as the management of grain, corn, ear mold incidents, and the occurrence of vomitoxin. So those are 2 priority areas that we want to see a particular increased investment in, which isn't to say that we won't support projects targeting other priorities, but those are 2 that we definitely want to see an influx of proposals in. So that takes care of the priority setting process for us.
Now we're going to move on to the proposals. Let me just proposal template. Okay, so this probably looks familiar from last year. I just did a few changes to it to make it more useful during our review process. So for instance, I moved some of the sections around. So this year we're asking you to put a project title at the top right there. We ask that when you're writing your application, make sure that you emphasize the benefit to Ontario grain farmers, and then include a realistic budget when you're presenting it, so that we can make sure that we can find whether or not we need matching funding for us to do it. Also, please adhere to page limits or word limits when outlined in the proposal. We'll give feedback on your proposals, but we do ask that you give us sufficient time before the call closes. Otherwise, we don't really have time to look at it, and we'll just tell you to submit it or tell us when it's submitted. And now we'll go through each section and give comments on what we'll be looking for in your sections.
Great. So one thing that Natalie mentioned, and I think it's important to emphasize, and this information is included in the guideline document, but Natalie mentioned benefit to producers. So as you researchers are preparing your research proposals, one thing to keep in mind is that these proposals get reviewed by a research committee. And that research committee is made up of 8 of our farmer members. Ultimately, what we want to ensure is that the research being funded and supported by GFO is benefiting those farmers. We want to make sure that the research demonstrates value to producers, because ultimately it's their checkoff dollars who are going to fund this research. So always keep that in mind when you're filling out these proposals. Although you might have a specific research interest, you need to make sure that you tie that research to the producer. I'm going to quickly talk about the title. Although it sounds very basic and very easy, we want to make sure that the title of your research proposal is concise but informative. We want to make sure that it's not 30 words long. Keep it short, keep it simple, but make sure it's very clearly demonstrating what exactly it is you're doing. The other thing that we want you to do is identify the specific research priority area that you're proposing here. So I talked about the 4 main priority areas. So that's agronomy and production, weed disease and insect pests, crop utilization and crop quality, and breeding and genetics. The purpose for selecting which priority area you're addressing is we have an internal coding system, and it allows us to file and sort those proposals accordingly. We want to make sure that we're not funding 100% of our projects being funded in agronomy and production. We want to make sure that there's somewhat of an even distribution, or that we're addressing the right priority areas accordingly. So that's the purpose for that. The other thing that we want you to identify is which specific priority it is that your proposal is addressing. So I talked about the priority document. You need to make sure that you identify which priority area and also which specific priority your proposal is addressing, because like I mentioned, we do have certain priorities that we put a particular emphasis on, so we want to make sure that we see what it is that you're trying to target. So we just got a chat question. We will address those questions at the end, but please, if you have questions throughout, please write them into the chat box and we'll scroll back through and make sure that we answer all those questions at the end. We've left a 10-15 minute window for questions at the end. So thank you. Please keep those questions coming and we'll make sure that we do address them.
Thank you. Okay, so next section is research contact information, and that's where you describe who's going to be on your research team. So principal investigator, and then collaborator 1 could be a co-lead or a collaborator. Just you can mention it in the role in the project if the second or the first collaborator is also a co-lead. And then also please explain what each person's going to be doing. So like if the collaborator 1 is going to be doing like project design or statistical support, please put it there. We expect that if they're listed as collaborator, they are collaborating, so that no need to reiterate that. And then if you have more than 3 collaborators, I do want to remind you that there is a spot at the end, part 13, where you can list up to 9 collaborators for your project.
Part 2 of the template is the project duration. So this is where we want you to identify the start date and the end date of your project. One thing to make note of is that projects can be anywhere from 1 to 5 years in length. And here we want you to identify sort of the calendar start date and end date. And in the budget file, it will give you more specifics and a breakdown of the budget by year. But once again, maximum of 5-year projects and no less than 1 year.
So the next section, we had this section last year, except I reworded it because there's some confusion about what we were asking. So I just want to quickly go over that, and I gave some definitions, and if you have any more questions afterwards, we'll answer that in the Q&A. So part 1 is where you tell us if there's any agreements that are ongoing that are related to this proposal exactly, and there you can say yes, and if you say yes, please explain who they're with, how long they're for. Just give us some information so that we can follow up on that if that's something that may be we need to look into. Second question is about intellectual property rights. So that's making sure that if you do have those, that you have proper clearance for this project, and then if you are expecting commercialization to come out of any of the deliverables, that you have the proper background paperwork set up for that already. So if you answer yes to any of those, please explain what you mean or what exactly it is that's to do with intellectual property. And again, if you have any questions about your specific project, you can give us a call and we can give you some ideas on how to write that. And the third, do you anticipate any intellectual property coming out from this project? That just means like if any of the deliverables we expect to have any commercial product come out of it, I don't know how else to say it. We expect scientific journals to be produced, so we're looking for anything other than a scientific journal. And if you do expect any property to come out of there, please indicate who would be owning it afterwards and how that could happen. Like who would need that IP process. Okay, so moving on from there, project summary. This is kind of the core information that I use to create our project database. So this was new last year, but it should be familiar to you guys who filled it out last year, but I'll just go over it quickly again. If you do have any questions on how to word things, you can go to our project database, scroll through, click on it if you see it makes sense to you. And if you still have questions, I'm happy to answer or give you some ideas on how to word things. So part A is our non-confidential executive summary. So just plain language, 2 paragraphs, explain the background of why the project or what the project will address and noting the target crops that you're working with. And then in the second paragraph, discuss how your project will address those issues. B, you're just going to give a quick point form on the objectives. And then part C is where you kind of write some impacts. And there you'll be saying why your proposal is important. And they should connect an expected research deliverable that you've cited in your project proposal with how it could realistically affect the sector or target audience. And we ask you to contain both immediate and potential impacts of research results in the section. And they should be concise and in point form. And I gave an example there. But again, if you have any questions or you want to see an example, there's some in our appendix for our project guide as well as on the project database.
Great. So part 4 addressed the what you're doing it and how you're doing it. Part 5 addresses the why you're doing it. So this is a chance for you to give us some background context and give us identify the knowledge gaps that are missing for a topic with appropriate references from previous research or other work that's been done in the area. So in part 5A, you should explain how the proposed research will address a knowledge gap and provide a rationale or a reason for doing this project. Any complicated terms and concepts should be explained for the readers to be able to review and for readers that are outside of that specialty. So it should be written in plain language here. Part 5B, where we ask you to clearly identify the expected benefits for Ontario grain farmers. This is where we want you to convince the research committee and defend your projects. The farmers need a justification for this research and a really strong rationale for how it's going to benefit them. Because like I mentioned a few sections ago, it is their checkoff dollars that are going to fund and support this work. So it's the Ontario grain farmers that your proposals really need to be targeting and really need to be convincing of their value or of their worth. Lastly, part 5C is a list of references. We ask you to use a consistent reference style, one that will allow our research department to access those citations where necessary, because in some cases, we'll read certain claims or statements that we'll want to, not necessarily double check, but we'll want to make sure that they are accurate, because sometimes they're somewhat surprising. And so we do want to be able to go back and check to make sure that they're in fact accurate. So that takes care of part 5, the background and literature review. Moving on to part 6, the research work plan. This is where we ask for a detailed description of the methodology. We want to know exactly what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. So we want to make sure that the section is written in language and with enough detail that a peer reviewer, for example, can determine if the approach is to achieve the research deliverables that were listed earlier in the proposal. We're looking at things like number of replications, number of sites, making sure that there's a good representation of work throughout the province. We want to see specifics on your data collection methods. Make sure that the format here is written very clearly, consistently, and with enough detail to be able to really replicate the work, or so that we have a real good understanding of how the work is going to be done. Part B, we ask you to describe your research deliverables, any tangible deliverables or milestones that will indicate the successful completion. So if there's an end product in mind, we want to know that final product is clearly identified, and if there are interim deliverables that are required throughout years 1, 2, 3, and 4 of a 5-year project, let's say, that we know what those are identified as. The other thing that we've started a new approach called SMART principles. And SMART is an acronym. We want to make sure that the deliverables that you present follow this SMART philosophy. And SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based. So any deliverable that you present in your proposal, whether it's an interim deliverable or a final endpoint deliverable, it needs to be specific, it needs to be quantifiable, so we need to be able to measure it, whether it's a yes or a no or a go, no go. It needs to be achievable, so we need to be able to get there. It needs to be realistic, and it needs to have a timely aspect linked to it. So it's going to be done in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, whatever that may be. And so that takes care of the research work plan. Moving on to part 7. This is where we ask about linkages to past, ongoing, or future projects. So in this part of the proposal, if your proposal is building upon work that's already been done or is currently being done, we want to know what the incremental improvements are upon that research. It allows you to present similar work that's being done, but also identify what differences will happen if it is a continuation of the previous project. This isn't limited to projects that are funded by Grain Farmers of Ontario. It could be any other projects that are also ongoing. It also doesn't have to, now you just mentioned to me, it doesn't have to be your research either. So if you are working closely with another group, they are perhaps leading a project and you want to do a spin-off project or another aspect of that work, you can still reference that other group's work to show how it's either a continuation or a linkage to that other work. Part 7B is a commercialization or a marketing plan. And here it's when a research deliverable is expected or has the potential to become commercialized. We want to know how that project can lead to a commercial product. So we want you to include information on your institution's internal departments that are available to help you with any intellectual property issues, or what else you might be looking at to get that final end product to market. And so that takes care of part 7.
So part 8 and 9 is part of our knowledge transfer section. And last year, this was new, but this year I've trimmed it down a little bit so you guys don't have to have so many target audiences. It should make it a little better and more clear for you guys in our research committee when deciding which target audiences to focus on. So Appendix A is where I ask you guys to look out first before even filling out this project. It's a non-exhaustive list of target audiences I've identified for our research and the ways to get the material to them. So I would recommend highly that you look at that Appendix A first before you dive into this part 8 and 9. Again, there's examples in the appendices for our program guide, so please look at those as well. So for this year, I've asked you guys to look at 3 target audiences, not including Grain Farmers of Ontario. That's assumed for us since we are funding it. So I'd like you guys to identify each target audience in part 8, and then if they're going to be helping during the project, either as like a steering committee or a collaborator of some sort, or a farmer cooperator, for instance, that's where you would write in here, involved during the project. If you're just talking about your audience, that's great. You move on to the next section, and this is where you tell us what communication materials you're creating to reach that audience. So we'd like you to write in point form based on objectives, identify the materials that you're going to be creating, what those goals are, and like what key components you're trying to explain to them. Like if your project is on, I don't know, plant breeding and you've got a few new genes, like you wouldn't talk about the crop. Your goal is to tell them about the new genes that are available. And then the estimated date of release. I just want to reiterate that the knowledge transfer, once you put it down, is not set in stone. I do make sure that once people are awarded the if they're awarded the grant, then I go and make sure that the knowledge transfer is cleaned up before we put it into our agreement. So you're not locked into anything you put here. It's more of an idea and gives us a chance to see what ideas you have and whether or not we can improve upon them.
So just to add one thing to the knowledge transfer, both Part 8 and Part 9. In the past, the knowledge transfer section has been notoriously poorly filled out. Oftentimes, researchers would simply say, I'm going to give a poster presentation or an oral presentation at a conference, or I'll publish a paper, and that's it. And we want to get away from that mentality. We want to make sure that a suitable or an appropriate target audience is identified, and we want to make sure that it's an effective knowledge transfer plan. Because although publishing a scientific paper is great, if you just say, I'm going to publish a publication, that won't be good enough. You'll need to identify the target audience. So if it's a publication, the target audience might be other researchers, other members of the research community. It could be graduate students, it could be undergrad students even. You need to talk about more specific than just a publication. What are you going to publish that paper in? Where are you going to publish that paper? In what journal? How often are you going to publish? Is it going to be something that you publish every year, or is it going to be a one publication at the end of it all? So it needs to be a really well thought out, customized, tailored knowledge transfer plan that's specific to your project. And we're happy to work back and forth with the researchers one-on-one to deliver a very strong and effective knowledge transfer plan. This is a section that we're going to put a very high emphasis on, and we will expect that it be filled out very well. So please pay close attention when you're filling out parts 8 and parts 9.
Yeah, so pretty much make sure that your research deliverable, if it's something that can be communicated or should be communicated, has a place in part 9.
Moving on to part 10. Part 10 is a high-level snapshot of your budget by year. So this is where you would indicate what your overall funding request will be. So that takes care of part 10A, and we ask that you break that down by calendar year, and we use an April to March time frame to kind of account for a typical growing season start time. The other thing to mention here is part 10B, where we ask for additional sources of cash funding by year. In some cases, our research committee will review a proposal that asks for a sum of money, and we don't see enough value to support that in full. And in some cases, our approval might be contingent or conditional on other sources of funding being made available. So in some cases, we will expect that you apply to other research funding programs to then be able to fund that proposal. So please keep that in mind. In some cases, Brain Farmers of Ontario call for proposals shouldn't be or won't be the only source of funding for your given proposal. So
Yeah,
just keep that in mind.
You can always contact us and ask us if it's something that you should pursue. You can always put pending if you're planning on doing it and it just hasn't been applied to yet. We do wait for proposals to filter through, for instance, like NSERC grants before, and we will wait for those if we see enough value in the project. So don't feel bad about putting pending if you plan on applying.
Yeah, that's still valuable there. And although we've probably run out of time to go through the detailed budget file. In addition to the template here, there will be an Excel file that presents an opportunity to give a lot more detail of what exactly it is you'll be spending your money on. The first tab of that Excel file gives a series of instructions or guidelines for how to fill out that Excel file. So we recommend that you use that first tab and read it very carefully and follow that along. The Excel file is fully functional. There should be no need for you to use any formulas or calculations. Simply enter the values into the appropriate cell and the calculations should all be figured out for you. If there's any issues with functionality, let Natalie know. We'll work it out. However, we feel like the budget file should be ready to go. So make sure that you look at that instruction tab when you start filling that in.
I just forgot to mention at the beginning that both of these files, the proposal and the budget, are meant for Microsoft Office programs. So if you're using another program, please let me know because all the functionality with these will be lost. So I'll have to create another file for you guys in some format that you'll be able to use. But again, let me know and I'll be able to forward that on to you individually as needed. The final part of this is about the voluntary consent. That's Appendix C. And that's literally where I'm asking you if I can post your information on our project database, and in publications such as like the Ontario Grain Farmer, we'll contact you before we create any like articles on you. We'll make sure that you'll be able to read them. But this is just saying that, yes, I do agree that you can put that stuff up on the internet about me on our project database. So that's all this voluntary consent form is about. If you do have any questions, please let me know and we can go over it. And then I just created a submission checklist. You don't have to check it off, but it's just for you guys to make sure that you have everything. Please submit the files in their original file format. Don't send PDFs or photocopies, please. If you're sending in your Appendix B, because your institution doesn't have an internal system, that's great. However, you don't need to do both. If you have any questions from your research offices, just let them ask them to contact me. I only need one or the other. I don't need both. So for instance, if you're at the University of Guelph, there's an OR5, you can submit a photocopy of that. That's fine. But you don't need to submit both Appendix B and OR5. Just there's a lot of confusion with that last year, and I don't need all that information. It's not necessary. So with that, I think we are pretty much wrapped up, and I'll just go back to our original file with our contact information. And guys, if you want to write any questions into the chat, please do so now while I get that.
So while Natalie and I were going through the proposal template, there were a few questions that came through, so maybe we'll start addressing those now. And if there's any other questions, once we're done addressing the ones that are in the chat room, if you guys want to unmute your line and ask a question audibly, that would be great too. I will remind any latecomers to the call that we are recording the session in order to share the presentation with those who weren't able to attend at this time. So if you are asking a question, just be aware, this is a disclaimer that you will be recorded. If you have any objections to that, please email us the question separately and we'll make sure that we announce that and address it anonymously. So the first question was about priorities. And so since that is my responsibility at GFO, I guess I will address it. And the question reads, if our proposal does not specifically target any of the priorities, what should we enter on the priority section? Well, it is an absolute requirement of the GFO call for proposals that the research that you are presenting does target at least one of the research priorities. So if you're not sure how your proposed research addresses a priority, let Natalie or myself know. We can discuss things with you over the phone or over email. But if it's hard for us to rationalize how it does address a priority, then unfortunately that would be an ineligible proposal. So I apologize if that wasn't the answer that you wanted to hear.
But we will work with you to figure it out. Maybe you just misread a priority, or you didn't realize that it could fit under something. If you mean by priority like the research area, or like we've tried to leave the specific research priorities as vague as possible, so you should be able to fit it if you are in one of those research areas on grain research.
At the same time, if you feel like there is a priority that's missing from our document, I would love to hear everyone's thoughts or opinions on that. So if there's something that you have in mind and you think that it's missing from our priority document, please give me a call, shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to discuss further to see if it needs to be included in next year's revised priority document.
And there's another question about collaborators. They don't need to be based in Ontario. Oh, sorry. Do all the collaborators have to be based in Ontario? No, they do not have to be based in Ontario. We just want to make sure that the work is beneficial to farmers in Ontario. So that's the only stipulation there.
Another question that came through the chat room was, is there any maximum limit for funding? Is there any focus on priority funding for a particular region, for example, Southern Ontario? I'll handle this a few sections at a time. The first question about limits for funding. No, there is no maximum limit for funding. However, when you are filling out your budget, please, one thing that we will look at is whether it's a realistic budget, whether it's a big enough budget to be able to do the work that you're proposing, or whether it's too small of a budget. So make sure that you're mindful of how realistic that budget is. We had a question about a focus on priority funding for any given regions. As far as priority for funding goes, we prioritize the research priorities that we've targeted for this particular year. So we have placed an emphasis this year on breakdown of resistance and the vomit toxin issue in corn. That said, we do fund only work that does address the research priorities listed in that document. With respect to geographic distribution, we are mindful of the entire province of Ontario. We don't put an emphasis or a priority on, let's say, Southwest Ontario. Our research committee, made up of 8 farmer members, ensures that it has a very broad coverage of the entire province. So we have farmer members from all various districts of Ontario, making sure that we cover the whole province. And so there is no priority given to any one part of Ontario. So hopefully that addresses that question.
Are there any other questions that anyone has, either through the mic or through the chat?
We'll keep the chat room open for a minute or two, and we'll kind of linger behind here. If there are no other questions, we do want to take the chance to thank everyone for taking the time out of their day to participate in this information session. We do have another question coming through here, so we'll address that right now. The question is there a maximum number of proposals a researcher can submit? The short answer is no. If you have 10 ideas, give us 10 proposals. If you have 1 idea, give us 1 proposal.
Yeah.
There is no limit on number of proposals that can be submitted.
I will qualify that though, but like if you do have a large amount and we can't fund them all, we will ask you to prioritize through, like, we'll reach out to you and ask you to prioritize which one you think is the most important. We take those comments back to our committee, and then we go on from there. So there is that qualifier. Any other questions?
Maybe before we do the wrap up and the thank yous, we'll just sort of linger quietly here, and we'll just sit idly for a minute or two, and then we'll, if nothing comes through, then we'll do the wrap up, just so that we're not being interrupted with other questions here.
Mm-hmm.
At this time, it might be a good idea to remind everyone that the deadline for the proposal submission is November 24th. I believe that's a Friday,
Yes.
and we're targeting end of day, so 4 p.m. So please ensure that you do meet that deadline. If you are done your proposal ahead of November 24th, we would not reject an early submission.
No, and please be mindful of your internal review process. I believe it's the 15th of November, which University of Guelph. I'm not too sure about the other ones. I just saw that on Twitter a few weeks ago once we released it. So please be mindful of your internal review process. It may be due sooner than you think.
And the other thing that we do want to emphasize is that the research department here at Grain Farmers Ontario is here to help you. We're here to work together at developing the strongest possible proposals so that we're funding the highest quality work. And so if you would like us to look over your ideas or have anything you want us to have a look at, feel free to engage with us, give us a call, send us an email, run your ideas by us. But at the same time, if you are going to share your proposal ideas ahead of us, be mindful of timelines. Don't come to us on November the 23rd asking if it's a great idea.
Yeah.
We'll be flooded with work by that time,
Yeah.
so be mindful of that as well.
And the next question we have are proposals that have matching funding viewed more favorably than those without. And I would say that it's kind of 50-50. It depends on the project itself. If we have identified that there's like a strong industry partner that should be at the table if you're interested in commercializing, then yes. Otherwise, it really depends on the budget itself. If it's something that we really like, but we don't feel we can fund it all ourselves just from limited resources, I know that's kind of a...
I would say it never hurts to have additional sources of funding.
Yeah. I wouldn't say it's more favorable than others, but yeah. So I guess also just to wrap it up, we're just gonna say that we do review the proposals after they're submitted in December and through on to January, where we have our proposal review days. So the proposals that are recommended for funding are given to our board in their February meeting, and then after that meeting around mid-February, we start sending out notifications whether or not you've been awarded the funding. So we just ask, we haven't set a specific date yet, but I will let everyone know who submitted the time frame when we're having our proposal review days. We ask that you are around to answer any questions we may have. Otherwise, we'll just have to go with the information that we have on hand. We do ask up follow-up questions when reviewing proposals.
Seeing that there aren't many other questions filtering in, I think now would be a great time to sort of slowly start wrapping it up. Once again, I do want to thank everyone for taking the time out of their days to participate in this information session. Before we call it quits, I do want to once again emphasize that we're here to help you guys out. So as you guys start developing your proposal and want to run things by us, we encourage you to do so. Any questions, shoot us an email, give us a call, and we're happy to help.
Yeah. Thanks again, and sorry again for the earlier inconvenience of feedback. I hope your hearing is still good. Thanks again, everyone, and hope you have a great afternoon, even though it's kind of crummy, at least here in Guelph.
Best of luck with the competition, guys.
Bye for now.